I just found out my wife's affair with her boss, and he's claiming we owe him $250, $0 in a shady property deal from our divorce that I never agreed to. Now everything's headed to court and I'm losing my mind. I never thought I'd be here, writing this, but I guess life has a strange way of throwing you into situations you never saw coming. It all started with a gut feeling. Something was off with Lisa. We'd been together for over 10 years, married for 8, and honestly I thought I knew her inside and out. But lately her attitude had shifted. She was more distant, secretive even. She'd come home late, excuse herself with some bullshit about work needing her, or she was catching up with friends, though she rarely went out anymore. She used to be the kind of woman who shared everything, but suddenly she was hiding her phone, deleting messages, acting like she was trying to hide something. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she was stressed at work, or maybe she was just tired. But then I noticed her phone was always glued to her hand when she thought I wasn't looking. And her texts, they were full of vague emojis, late-night messages I couldn't see, and calls she'd quickly silence if I walked into the room. Still, I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just being cautious. But the thing is, I started finding little things: her perfume on her clothes when she came back from her business dinners, receipts from places I didn't recognize, and once I caught her in a lie about where she was going. One night I decided enough was enough. I followed her after she left for what she said was a meeting with her boss, Mark. I waited in the car for about 20 minutes and then I saw her walk into a hotel with him. They were holding hands, laughing like they were teenagers. I couldn't believe it. My stomach sank. I felt this rush of anger and betrayal I'd never experienced before. She'd been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back all this time. I watched as they disappeared into a room, and I knew that whatever I saw was just the beginning of the nightmare. When I finally confronted her the next day, her reaction was classic Lisa. She spun. Some bullshit about how I was paranoid, that I was reading too much into things, and that I was crazy for accusing her without proof. But I had enough. I told her I saw her with Mark, and her face twisted into this bitchy sneer. She said, "Oh, so now you're accusing me of cheating, you're overreacting. Maybe if you paid more attention to me, I wouldn't have to look for validation elsewhere." That was her go-to line: blame me for everything, make me feel like I was the problem. But I wasn't stupid. I knew what I saw. The emotional hit me hard. At first I was just numb, like I'd been punched in the gut. Then came anger, hot, uncontrollable rage. How could she do this? How could she betray everything we had built? I felt stupid for trusting her so blindly. I didn't sleep that night, replaying everything. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong, why she'd chosen to cheat on me with her boss of all people. Mark was a shady character, slick, manipulative, always playing the nice guy in front of everyone, but I saw through that. I knew he was the reason. Lisa was acting so secretive lately. Now I had proof and it shattered my world. I started digging into her phone, her emails. I found messages that confirmed the affair, flirty texts, plans to meet up, even explicit messages. It was like a punch to the chest every time I uncovered another lie or another betrayal. The worst part was knowing that this wasn't just about sex. It was about the fact that she'd lied to me for months, maybe longer, and that she was capable of hiding this from me while we were supposed to be building a life together. I felt like I was losing my mind. How do you process something like this? How do you go on after realizing your wife, the woman you loved and trusted, had been cheating on you with her boss, and now she's trying to gaslight you into thinking you're the crazy one? That's where I am now, standing at the edge of this mess, trying to figure out what's next. After the initial shock wore off, I started to realize just how deep this betrayal went. Lisa, my wife, was never the innocent victim she tried to portray herself as. No, she was manipulative, lying through her teeth and clearly enjoying her little secret affair with Mark. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind for so long. All those late nights, the little excuses, the work dinners, it was all bullshit. She was screwing her boss and I was just the fool who didn't want to see the signs. The worst part was the way she lied about everything. When I confronted her, she played the victim, crying and saying I was overreacting. "You don't understand, I was just talking to Mark about the project. You're paranoid. Yeah, right. She kept insisting it was innocent, that it was just a fling, that she didn't mean for it to go anywhere, but I knew better. I saw the texts, the hotel receipts, the look in her eyes when she thought I wasn't paying attention. She was caught in her own web of lies, and she was trying to spin it so I'd feel guilty for accusing her. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. I kept thinking about everything, our life together, the vows we took, the dreams we shared. And now it all seemed pointless. How could I trust her again? How could I come back from this? The pain was overwhelming, a mixture of rage and heartbreak. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and completely lost. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't even know where to start. The next morning, I decided to take a hard look at our finances. I needed to understand if this affair was just about her sneaking around or if there was something more sinister going on. That's when I stumbled upon the real shocker. I found out about a property deal that Lisa and I had been involved in, something we'd been working on for months. It was supposed to be a straightforward investment, but I found out that she'd been secretly negotiating with her boss, Mark, behind my back. They'd been trying to buy out a piece of land, flipping it into some shady development scheme. The catch: I never agreed to any of it, and I had no idea she was even involved. What made it worse was the amount of money involved, 250 to be exact. Mark was claiming we owed him that much, and he was threatening legal action. I couldn't believe it. Lisa had been lying to me about everything, and now she was embroiled in some shady property deal that I had no part in. I felt like my entire world was collapsing. I trusted her with my life, and she'd been secretly screwing her boss and screwing me over in the process. I knew I had to confront her again, but this time I wanted answers, real answers. I called her at work and told her I knew about the affair and the property deal. Her reaction: she flipped out, calling me crazy, accusing me of spying on her, and saying I was just jealous because she was more successful than me. That was her favorite line, trying to make me feel small, like I was the problem. But I wasn't backing down. I told her she was done, that I was going to find out everything, and that I wasn't going to let her ruin me. I started planning my next move. I needed to gather evidence, talk to a lawyer, and figure out how to get out of this mess without losing everything. I was furious, hurt, and feeling more betrayed than ever, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. Lisa was a bitchy, manipulative woman, and she'd do whatever it took to save herself. I wasn't going to let her get away with it, not this time. The next steps would be crucial, and I was determined to fight back. Whatever it took, I was going to expose her and make sure she paid for what she'd done. By the time I sat down to really lay out my plan, I was boiling with anger and frustration. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Mark, laughing, touching, pretending everything was normal. I knew I had to act fast, but I also had to be careful. Lisa was not the type to go down without a fight, especially when she'd been caught red-handed. I had to cover my bases. First thing I did was dig into the property deal. I got hold of the emails, the contract drafts, and some bank statements. What I uncovered was worse than I thought. Lisa and Mark had been secretly working on this deal for months. They'd been talking about splitting the profit, an almost guaranteed score if they pulled it off. The thing was, I had no idea about any of this. She kept it all hidden from me, probably because she knew I'd blow a gasket. The deal was shady as hell. They were trying to buy land under the table, flip it quickly, and walk away with a huge sum while I was clueless, probably thinking everything was fine. And then I saw the part that made my blood run cold. Mark's email chain with Lisa, discussing how they'd cover their tracks and how she'd keep me distracted. That was the moment I realized how deep her lies went. This wasn't just about her cheating. She was actively involved in a financial scheme that could ruin us. I felt sick. I felt betrayed on every level, emotionally, financially, morally. I started to question everything about our life together. How much of what she told me was a lie? How long had she been planning this? I knew I had to get legal advice. I found a lawyer who specialized in divorce and financial fraud. I explained everything, handed over the evidence, and watched her face as I did. Her reaction was classic, defensive, bitchy, trying to turn it around on me. "You're overreacting," she snapped. You're paranoid and you don't understand how business works. Yeah, right. I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. She was the one hiding things, lying about her whereabouts, sneaking around with Mark, and now trying to spin it like I was the crazy one. I also started to realize that her pride was her biggest weapon. She was convinced she could lie her way out of this mess, manipulate everyone, and keep her reputation intact. But I wasn't going to let her. I started to document everything, screenshots of texts, emails, receipts, all of it. I was building my case, not just for the divorce but for the financial mess she dragged us into. I knew Mark was involved and I knew he'd try to twist things in his favor, but I had enough to expose the entire scheme, and I was determined to do it. In the meantime, I kept my distance from Lisa. I didn't want to give her any more ammunition to gaslight me or turn things around. I kept things cold, calculated. I made sure my bank accounts were secure, changed passwords, and started talking to a financial advisor about protecting what was ours. I also contacted a private investigator, someone I could trust, to dig into Mark's background. I wanted to know what kind of shady deals he'd been involved in before, whether he had a history of legal trouble or scams. The emotional toll was heavy, but I was trying to stay focused. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. One moment I'd feel rage, the next sheer sadness. I kept questioning myself, how I missed the signs, what I could have done differently. But I also knew that dwelling on that wouldn't help. I had to act, and I had to do it quickly. I couldn't let her spin her lies any longer. I had to expose her, take control of this mess, and protect what little dignity I had left. I was starting to realize that trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. But I also learned that when someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them the first time. Lisa was not the woman I thought I married. She was a liar, a cheat, and a schemer. The betrayal cut deep, but I was determined to come out of this stronger, one way or another. It was time to fight back. No matter what it took. The more I uncovered, the angrier I got. Every new piece of evidence felt like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't stop now. I had to be methodical. If I was going to take her down, I needed to do it smart. I started compiling everything: emails, texts, receipts, bank statements, everything that showed her involvement in the shady property deal and her affair with Mark. The amount of lies she'd told, the secrets she'd kept, it was staggering. And all the while, I was sitting here wondering how I'd missed the signs, how I'd been so blind to the woman I thought I knew. One thing I learned fast: Lisa was a master at lying, and she had no problem throwing me under the bus to save herself. When I confronted her with the evidence, she spun a new story, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that Mark was just a business acquaintance, and that I was crazy for suspecting her. She even had the nerve to say I was jealous and insecure. That was classic Lisa, blame everyone else for her mistakes, but I wasn't buying her bullshit anymore. I could see the cracks in her facade, and I knew she was trying to manipulate me into backing off. I realized I needed backup, so I reached out to a lawyer specializing in divorce and financial fraud. I explained everything, handed over my evidence, and watched her reaction closely. She played the victim again, crying and claiming I was ruining everything and that I was trying to destroy her. But I could see through her act. She was panicked, trying to hold on to her lies, her affair, her money, everything. I knew I had to act fast before she managed to spin this into her favor, or worse, destroy us both. Meanwhile, I began to think about what I really wanted. Part of me wanted to expose her, take her to court, and walk away with what was rightfully mine. But another part was just exhausted, emotionally drained from the betrayal, the lies, the constant stress. Still, I knew I couldn't just walk away. Not after everything. I decided I'd fight for the truth, for my dignity, and for whatever justice I could get. I also started to protect my own financial interests. I changed passwords on all our accounts, moved money into separate accounts, and hired a financial advisor to help me get a clearer picture of what I was dealing with. One night, I sat down and drafted a timeline of everything I'd uncovered. It was a brutal process, reliving every lie, every secret meeting, every deceitful text. It made me realize how deeply she'd woven her web of lies. The affair was just the surface. The real damage was the financial scheme she'd been hiding from me. I knew Mark had been pushing her into this, using her as a pawn, and she'd willingly played along. I started to see how much she'd lied to me about her intentions, her feelings, her loyalty. She'd been planning her escape, her new life with Mark, all while pretending everything was fine. I also reached out to someone I knew I could trust, a friend who had experience with shady business deals and legal battles. I told him everything and asked for advice on how to handle the upcoming court proceedings, how to protect myself legally, and how to navigate the emotional wreckage. He told me to stay calm, gather as much evidence as I could, and not to let her manipulate me anymore. He warned me that Lisa was a bitchy, cunning woman who'd do whatever it takes to save herself, including lying under oath. As I sat there, going through all this, I felt a strange mixture of resolve and despair. I knew I had to keep fighting, but part of me just wanted to walk away, forget everything, and start over. But I couldn't ignore the fact that she'd betrayed me on every level, emotionally, financially, morally. I had to hold her accountable, not just for the affair, but for the financial mess she'd created. I was determined to expose her, to take back control, and to make sure she paid for her lies. This was about more than just cheating. It was about integrity, trust, and justice. And I was ready to see it through, no matter how ugly it got. I knew she'd try to spin the story, call me crazy or paranoid, but I wasn't going to let her. I'd already seen her true colors. Now I was just waiting to see how far she'd go to try and save herself. Whatever happened next, I was prepared to fight for what was mine. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal consultations, secretive meetings, and endless nights of going over every detail. I felt like I was walking through a minefield. Every step could blow everything up or set me free. Lisa, of course, kept up her bitchy act, throwing tantrums, accusing me of spying, and insisting I was just jealous because she was more successful than I am. She played the victim, crying about how I was ruining her life, but I saw through her. Deep down, I knew she was panicked, desperate to save herself from the mess she'd created. The property deal was the biggest bombshell. I'd uncovered enough evidence to know she and Mark had been pushing this shady scheme behind my back for months. They were trying to buy land, flip it quickly, and walk away with a hefty profit, 250 to be exact. Mark was claiming we owed him that much, and he was threatening legal action. The thing is, I never agreed to any of it. She kept me in the dark, probably hoping I'd never find out. Now I had proof. I had emails, bank statements, and even witness testimony from some of her contacts who confirmed her involvement. I knew I had to act fast. I hired a private investigator to dig into Mark's background, his past deals, any legal trouble, shady connections. I wanted to know exactly what kind of snake I was dealing with. Meanwhile, I kept my lawyer updated, preparing for court. I was determined to fight this, not just for the money, but to expose her lies and betrayal. She kept insisting it was just a misunderstanding, that Mark was like family, that I was overreacting. Yes, she was good at lying, but I'd seen too much now. There was no way I was going to let her manipulate her way out of this one. One night, I sat alone in my apartment, going over everything I'd collected. I couldn't believe how much she'd hidden from me. The truth was uglier than I ever imagined. She'd been planning her escape, her new life with Mark, all the while pretending to be this perfect wife. I remembered the way she used to look at me, full of love, or so I thought, and now I saw her for what she really was. A bitchy, selfish woman who'd throw everything away for a quick profit and a new man. I also started to realize how much I'd been a fool. I'd trusted her with everything, my heart, my money, my future, and she'd been screwing around behind my back. That realization hit hard. I wondered how I'd missed all the signs, how I'd ignored the little things, the late-night texts, the secret meetings. But I also knew I couldn't change the past. All I could do was protect myself now and fight for what's rightfully mine. I began to prepare for the worst: court battles, accusations, maybe even a divorce. I knew Lisa wouldn't go down without a fight, but I was ready. I had enough evidence to prove her involvement in the property scheme, and I was going to use it. I also contacted some financial advisors to help me figure out how to split the assets, how to protect what's left of our savings, and ensure she wouldn't get away with draining everything. Behind all the chaos, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I finally saw her for who she really was, selfish, manipulative, and utterly untrustworthy. And I realized that I deserved better. I'd given her everything, my love, my trust, my money, and she'd repaid me with lies and betrayal. But I wasn't